Right, welcome back. Thank you for joining this next session, which is going to be another panel. This panel, we're going to be getting into UAV performance using AM, and to talk about that, we have some excellent people who are undoubtedly experts in deploying this technology and even making technology. So, without further ado, I'd like to sort of bring everybody across to the stage. Here we go. Great, welcome everyone. Welcome Frank, Emily, and John. Thank you for joining our AMA Aerospace, Space and Defense event today. And if you're watching the event, please don't be shy of your questions. But there's plenty of opportunity to ask our panelists anything you'd like to know about these topics. Make sure you use the Q&A to do so. So I think before we sort of get into the conversation, and I want to sort of go through a bit of a structured approach on the strategic context, the technical implementation, and then get into some use cases. I think before we do any of that, though, let's just maybe briefly, if you could introduce yourselves. I think we'll start with you, Emily, move to you, John, and then finally we'll go to you, Frank.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So my name is Emily Levin. I'm an application engineer at HP. I've been at HP about 5 years, and actually my background is in materials science. When I started at HP, I was on the R&D side working on new materials, new fusing agents for our technology, the multi-jet fusion additive manufacturing technology. And then now as an application engineer, I work more directly with our customers, figuring out how multi-jet fusion and additive manufacturing fits in with their ecosystem. And I specialized in the unmanned vehicle space.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Hi, John.
Hi, so my name is John Martin. I'm the Additive Manufacturing Research Director at America Makes. So I work we have three pillars: education, workforce development, technology, and industrial base integration. So I fall in the technology pillar, focusing on basically trying to keep tabs on additive manufacturing, where we're at right now, and potential likelihoods of where we're going. One of the main purposes of the Institute America Makes is to increase the rate of adoption of additive manufacturing within the U.S. Industrial supply base, primarily to support the DoD, but in general to have a healthy supply base in general, which is seen as good for the DoD. So some of the things in my role that I've been focusing on, quite a few things, but a few I'll mention that stand out. One is additive manufacturing standards. So we have an initiative called Additive Manufacturing Standardization Collaborative with NIST that's been going on for quite a while. One of the main focuses is to identify gaps in the standards, whether it be missing standards or standards that exist but maybe need to be more well defined or matured, if you will. And this is all based on leveraging our membership or consortium based institutes. So we have a lot of members from industry, academia, other nonprofits, national labs, and we get their input from the community to try and see where things should be going and what direction. We're also trying to look at standards, how they're being used across different industry sectors, and which standards organizations different industries prefer. And then we've also been working a lot with qualification efforts. So a lot in the recent past with operational qualification. So dealing with a specific material for a specific process on different printers, and seeing how that variation, what it looks like, what are trying to really get a good understanding of the key process variables and things like that. And then more recently getting into the PQ, which, maybe I'll just say is the part qualification aspect, or getting closer to application, and then material qualifications,
Excellent.
generating data sets.
We're going to get to, we've got a presentation on that very topic later on today, so hopefully you can stick around for that. Frank, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and Blueflite, and then we'll go to you, Dan, for a brief intro as well.
Sure. So Frank Knoppel, co-founder and CEO of Blueflite. My background is in the aerospace sector, and a passion, obviously, for anything that flies is unmanned and autonomous. Blueflite is a drone OEM. We're operating out of Michigan in the US, and a large part of our drone utilizes 3D printed parts. And I was glad to be here today at the panel and talk about some of the really big advantages of having drone technology that is 3D printed, and some of the challenges that have to be overcome. But gives a lot of advantages of going down that route, and it's maybe not the most obvious when you start, but it all pays off in the long run. So glad to be here today.
Awesome. We're going to get into some of those advantages in a sec, I reckon. But Dan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for having me. I'll tell you guys a little bit about what we do at Firestorm. So we use additive manufacturing, actually printers made by Emily's company, to mass produce airframes and then all the structures that go into our drones. We take it a step further. We basically build an operating system that allows for true modularity to sit on top of the drone. So one of the big problems in the defense industry is anytime you want to put a new camera or a new payload onto a drone, it usually costs hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to integrate it. By using additive manufacturing, we can literally get the design of the system, CAD it out, and then print it either in our factory, or the second part of my business I'll explain, in our mobile factories, to basically allow you to modify your product in real time. And we've had a ton of traction. We're about 3 years old, but we've got about $100 million of government contracts. And it's now bifurcated half between the drone, because the drone warfare changes all the time as we watch, the battles in Ukraine. And then the second part in between this mobile manufacturing solution that we just announced our exclusivity with HP on. And the vision of that is not just drones. It's interesting when you give the government, the DoD, the tools that they haven't had, which is industrial grade manufacturing closer to the edge, the things they fix will blow your mind, right? And so the aperture of our business, we're really kind of pivoting more into like a mobile manufacturing solution, starting with, our nylon 12 printers, but we're now also looking at metals as well. So that's what we do.
Superb. And for anyone who's not following Dan on LinkedIn, definitely worth a follow, not just for the sort of superb footage you often share there. I always like opening up the app and seeing what you're sharing that day. So everyone's talked a bit about what they're doing, right? But I mean, I think the question is, right, why are you doing it? What is it about additive that unlocks something in the design of drones and the deployment of them that conventional manufacturing doesn't? I think let's talk to you, Frank, first. Then we can talk to you, Dan, and maybe Emily, if you don't mind, sort of given your experience, maybe coming in at the end and telling us a bit anything the chaps don't mention.
Yeah, there are multiple advantages of doing additive in drone design and manufacturing, and one of them is the geometries that additive allows that traditional methods will not allow, especially when you talk about aerodynamic optimization or structural optimization. And in our case, we have drone technology that's utilized for logistics applications. So there is an internal payload bay. There are the avionics that are fitted, and going down the additive route will allow you a lot better integration, which ultimately leads to weight efficiencies, cost efficiencies, and structures that are otherwise not attainable and give you certain advantages. The second advantage is, and we're comparing this to the more traditional carbon layer manufacturing in the aerospace sector, which very often yields a complete fuselage or much bigger structures. In our case, we can be very modular, and that has advantages for maintenance, and is driving down costs and is also maximizing uptime of the drone. So the modularity allows you to basically have more of a patchwork approach of different elements that are being put together to make the entire system. And if something breaks on the field, then swapping a small module is a lot lighter and easier and cost efficient than having to send back the fuselage for a repair job that sometimes needs to be done at the OEM. So that's kind of the second advantage. The third advantage is throughout the design cycle and having to respond to customer requirements, and maybe you need to integrate some payload or additional avionics, or makes changes to the geometry, and having this in a 3D printed or an additive approach allows you to react to these customizations really quick. You can literally design this on a CAD and print it overnight, and start going into an iterative design process that would otherwise almost be pretty much impossible, and yield results in a very quick way. And I would even throw in a fourth element, which is also when you start thinking about scaling production. So in the drone space, maybe unlike the traditional aviation space, the volumes are much bigger, right? We're not talking about a couple of drones a year. We're talking about hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of drones. And the additive approach allows these volumes to happen with lead times that are commercially acceptable, and also drive down cost, right? And I think, I would say these are the four primary reasons, and there's a lot more to it, but I would leave it at that.
Yeah, well, let's leave some reasons for Dan as well.
Yeah, Frank, I don't have anything to talk about now. You kind of put a nice bow on it. No. So like high level design and speed of iteration and speed manufacturing is something that we found really interesting, especially when you compare it to like traditional carbon layup. And I'll give you an example. We have folks that have come from the big defense primes, a bunch of the really well-funded and famous defense startups that are building drones. And when you like after you process the parts, because of how we've been able to design our printed fuselages, we've been able to cut our manufacturing time down from almost 2 days to build a drone to slightly less than 3 hours, with the goal of 2 hours. Where does that compare in the industry? It's usually 300 to 400 person hours to assemble and build a single drone at this point. So that's what additives allowed us to do. It's the design plus the ability to kind of make it more manufacturable is what we found. And because it's actually a pretty resilient technology, it's not like you're using these things one time and throwing them away. We have airframes with hundreds of hours of flights on them. I mean, it's incredibly impressive. The two other things, though, that I'd like to touch on, one, I highlighted it earlier, but the changing nature of warfare. A lot of the drones that the US and NATO countries have given to Ukraine actually sit in warehouses. And why is that? It's because the Russians are really good at jamming GPS and radio communication links. And what that means is if you actually want to change the radio on your drone, you have to almost go in and completely rebuild not only the electrical infrastructure, but a lot of times the fuselage and the wing sections of your drone to put that radio in there. So what we've been able to do is use additive manufacturing to really, really decrease the time of putting new payloads onto drones. And then the second and probably we think larger issue is as the world continues to bifurcate, you're seeing this now across the world, like no Chinese parts in drones, no, both in the US, in Europe, and even India just announced this. Okay. And so contested logistics, how do you get your stuff to where it needs to be to the point of need is a catchphrase that we're hearing across the Department of Defense. How we're saying we're going to solve that is it's not only about having fixed manufacturing lines, okay? Those are needed, right? And that's how you can get to scale. But with what we've done with HP, which is figure out how to put one of these industrial 3D printers into like a factory where we can build 50 of our 6 feet by 6 feet drones a month, or 4,000 quadcopters a month out of two 20-foot containers. This fundamentally changes, in our mind, the nature of contested logistics. This now becomes a get your powder, test your electronics, put it all in a box, and then send it forward. And now you can be printing for months at a time and building your drones at the point of need. So we want to take that a step further, of course, which is basically true federated manufacturing. So have microfactories around the world. And you know, I think as AI design gets better too, and I'm really going to reach into the future here, but we think that there's a world in the next maybe 3 to 5 years where you can actually be like, here's my supply chain, here's all my factories. What is the mission I need to accomplish, and how can I build it using the printers and the parts I have available? So quite ambitious.
Fascinating, yeah, and yeah, understated, I think. I should say quite ambitious. But I think some of the points there, you know, scaling production. I wasn't really expecting this to be sort of the end use production, but and also supply chain sovereignty, something we've been talking a lot about today. Very interesting. I mean, Emily, do you see any other advantages that we haven't sort of captured here?
Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot of the things like reducing the design constraints, being able to have that faster iteration. And in terms of design constraints, in the talk earlier with Gino and Robert, they talked about the lightweighting through being able to access really thin sections and complex geometries that you couldn't otherwise manufacture. But one thing that I do want to touch on is the ability to use computational tools and in order to optimize your application. So I'm talking about things like topology optimization or computational fluid dynamics, and being the output that you get from some of those things doesn't look like what we would traditionally manufacture, right? Doesn't look like what a human would design. And I have a example right here of a drone frame that was produced using topology optimization. So you give it all the design constraints, and a computer generated this geometry. No person is sitting there calculating the loads that go along all of these beams. And you get something that is like incredibly stiff, but that you could not traditionally manufacture. Sorry about my blurred background. But so what Additive does and what MJF does, it allows you to take advantage of those tools and get something that you wouldn't necessarily expect, but can optimize more for your application in the end.
Marvelous. Well,
Could I show one thing too?
yeah,
This just got onto my desk. So carbon fiber frames are how a lot of the FPV, the quadcopter drones that you guys see everywhere, are built because it's lightweight. We're now optimizing quadcopter frames to come out of MJF because the packing density too is like unbelievable, right? So Emily, I'm glad we coordinated, making sure we both had props to show today, right?
I'm always surrounded by them, so.
I think I've got a drone frame on the other side of the office, but I'm not going to go and get it. Let's talk about. So this is the actual. You know, you're building for very good reasons, right? But are there any particular sort of components that are sort of best suited to additive? You know, where is it the frames, the ducting, is it the payloads, or you know, what are you sort of utilizing additive for within that sort of I suppose vehicle or device? Frank, maybe you could tell us a little bit about sort of how it's getting done at Blueflite.
Yeah, so we're using it in a range of different locations in the drone. A lot of the surfaces, so the externalities of the drone, and I mean you see behind me. So we're not talking about the sort of quadcopters that Dan is referring to. So these are logistics tools. We're talking about 2 meters in length and 25 kilo in weight. And first of all, the having the exterior surfaces manufactured through additive again goes back to optimizing the shapes, and also inject through the computational tools that Emily referred to, first optimize the weight through these computational tools, and because in the end, we're always looking at weight and trying to reduce it as much as we can, but also optimize the airflow around the geometries. And having the additive approach allows you more precision and more complex geometries that may otherwise not be feasible, certainly not at the cost that it's possible to do with additive. One unusual and maybe unexpected place where we do use additive is in the landing gear, where you would think this is maybe one of the last to touch, but we have very good experience. And again, integrating components into the gear that otherwise would be very difficult or maybe impossible to achieve. And so these are structural payload or weight-bearing elements, and it's carrying in the end the entire drone during takeoff and landing, and it's absorbing shocks. But that's where we also use additive. And then in the inside of the drone, to install different elements, and Dan, you were referring to it, like either payloads or avionics. If you can then design these elements where the avionics are fitted onto the airframe, that's where we're using a lot of the additive as well. And and that's almost pretty much finding additive in every possible corner of the drone already. There's not many places left for additive. I think going forward, and as materials become more resilient and are more comparable to some of the properties of carbon fiber, we can maybe look at some of the propulsion elements and propellers, etc., where again geometries play a big role. But yeah, I think to your question, Michael, we almost use it in pretty much all the different components of the drone at this point in time.
Thank you. Dan, are there sort of elements on your drones which maybe it's easy to say which isn't made with additive?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a couple parts of our product where we don't use additive, but the fuselage, the wings, a lot of the control surfaces, we all design it with additive. We can optimize it. We can cycle really quickly, right? That's the great thing, is you can go to bed with a new design and test it in the morning. And I'm actually asking somebody, because I don't want to be rude and turn my camera off, I want to show you guys one of the empennage, so the back of our jet. It's a quad intake, so it has basically 4 ducts to like suck in air. It's something you really only see on like the F-22 and the F-35. We actually put some IP around it because it was one of the only ways we could actually manufacture this thing was through additive, which is really cool. And hopefully it's coming in here in a second, or I will get off camera.
They're not flying it in. Someone's going to just bring it.
Yeah, I wish it was getting flown in. I don't know if I'm good enough catcher to do that.
Yeah, sounds like it's pretty fast.
Yeah, exactly. No, but like the thing is like if you're looking at traditional manufacturing, like in 2 years, maybe you can get through a dozen revs of a design, 18 if you're like really like pushing it, because tooling is expensive, right? And that's the beauty. Like we can tweak things and test things at incredibly high speed, and I think it allows us to build a much more optimized product, frankly.
Yeah, so that's like sort of the traditional methods. Maybe sort of an iteration every 2 months, and you're now able to kind of incorporate those ideas and see if they work much faster. I think it was Rob Miller on the previous panel from the Eye Above was saying his drone is maybe 90% sort of additive. So it's remarkable to see an industry just enabled so much by the technology. I think I'd like to talk to you, John. Actually, we're seeing sort of quite a rapid evolution of materials and systems. Do you see any gaps in the infrastructure that are slowing down additive adoption? Now, that could be in UAV, which we're talking about here, but I mean, it could also be low volume aerospace applications, which maybe you also see.
Yeah, so as far as adoption, looking at things like infrastructure, I think a lot of it's based off of too, like kind of getting a better understanding, and some refer to it maybe as like cultural, but I don't know how well this ties into the UAVs or the drones, because I don't want to say it's Wild West, but it's new and kind of uncharted territory, but it's also regulated, from what I understand, but it's different. So when we get into like the qualification aspect, that's a big hurdle for us now in the additive community, where we're seeing basically, whether it be large prime contractors or sub-tier suppliers that are parts producers, they're putting out good quality product, but there's a lack of universal understanding of what is a good quality product, and is that a good quality product for the application that you're going to be using it in. So things like, I think, that are more underlying are understanding what are some of the, like, just in the general sense, design requirements or application spaces that a component would be used in, the environment. A lot of times it's difficult to get this information due to IP, or the information might be held under clearance authority if it's for DoD, but really we're working more towards just getting a general understanding or examples of what that looks like for different application spaces, as far as looking at things like consequence of failure, different failure modes, because this is going to affect, a lot of people talk about in situ process monitoring, which that technology's come a long way, but it's like, okay, but to what degree? What's a flaw? What's a defect? What's the probability of detection required? What are the key process variables for that specific additive manufacturing process? So right now, I think we're looking at a lot of things as a community, and we really need to start identifying the true keys that are going to make a part bad compared to acceptable coming off of a line, instead of trying to track everything and collecting all the data. And then what is truly key is kind of buried in that. Testing capabilities is a big thing that comes up a lot, especially for additive is very unique for some of its manufacturing capabilities, but it also kind of puts it in this area of extreme environment applications a lot of times. So it's like, okay, well, how do we qualify that material? Or how do we qualify that material on a certain printer? How can we ensure that it's coming off repeatable and reliable? And then how do we test it in those extreme environments for something that is cost effective? What kind of is tending to happen now is we're putting so much emphasis on inspection and testing, which is very, very important. But if it's to the point where it's just not, it's killing the business case, then it's really hard for startups and different companies to take what they've learned and push it forward and have it adopted. So those are, I think, a lot of the barriers that we're dealing with right now, is understanding what is required for qualification for certain applications.
It's a balancing act, and I'm glad you brought up the topic of materials there, because we've got Emily here, so I've got to ask, how is that materials innovation work changing what's printable, what's possible now for UAVs? And maybe that's in terms of, we heard earlier about some of the thermal environments, right? They're operating in, or the impact, or sort of the general sort of payloads. I mean, maybe tell us a little bit about sort of the materials perspective of those challenges.
Yeah, so at HP, it's really a combination of the engineering materials and the process. So the process itself is quite distinct. It uses an ink or a fusing agent to fully melt each layer, and so it results in really robust and isotropic parts. And that technology has continued to evolve and develop for higher precision and better repeatability and consistency. And that's really what we've seen is needed for production of these end-use parts for flight critical components, not just, maybe clips or something that or spacers, but really what we're seeing here is anything from those smaller quadcopters, frames, all the way through large 2-meter wingspan drones, printing the body panels and the fixed wings landing gears like we talked about today. So we have a full suite of materials that are highly engineered to go with this process. And that covers a big spectrum of the space that's necessary for UAVs. So we have materials that have rigidity, high stiffness, high ductility, and also materials in the elastomeric space as well that are used for some things like propeller cages. So in terms of the materials, HP has a PA12, nylon 12. That's kind of the most widely used material. It has really high strength to weight ratio and really high resolution so that you can print those complex geometries and use that combination of complex geometry, process, and material to enhance the application. We also have something like PA11 or nylon 11, which is higher ductility for applications that might require that or higher impact resistance, as well as like a TPU elastomer. We have several TPUs to choose from depending on the application. And then part of what I do is work with our customers to find what fits with them for the application that they're working on. We have a lot of internal data on material properties for PA12, even material cards, so that you can do that computational modeling. So yeah, it's really that combination of the highly engineered material process and geometry dependence that lets us now be producing in that space that's not just clips and spacers, but really flight critical components.
Superb. We have a couple of questions from the audience. So let's see if this one's for you, Dan. Would you like to sort of answer this, or is this giving too much of the game away? It's your choice, of course. So we've got Philip asking a bit more about the manufacturing details. I don't know how deep you want to go into this.
Yeah, I'll just say we build multiple platforms, and some of the things we're building the structure like directly into the drone. Other things we are putting like additional like support frames into our drone. So for the wings, some of our longer wings, you need like support structures to be put in. But for like, here's our empennage I was telling you guys about, where we basically have this quad intake here. Like these, there's no support structure here. This is just printed nylon 12. It's quite incredible. And then we've designed it. You can see here where it basically interlocks together, so they click together like Legos. It's really one of the cool things that allows us to build and scale.
Oh, superb. Well, thanks for giving us an insight there. This actual, not sure many people have seen that one up close, right? So, what about the role of additive playing in terms of repairing these things, whether they're in operation, in combat, or in the theatre? How you showed us a little sort of insight there about sort of how how they easily are to assemble. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I want to take it a step further and say, like, one of the killer use cases now for our XCell, which is our mobile manufacturing cell that we're kind of building or distributing with HP, is that at a recent exercise, not only did we repair our stuff, but we fixed 5 other people's UAVs. Okay. And from one of the words you hear in the Department of Defense is availability. A lot of times, if you break something, you put it in a box until you get a repair part. The idea that if you're in the field for weeks or months at a time, because some of these deployments are months, you could fix something in less than 24 hours. It is like mind blowing to them. Okay. And so look, we can't fix everything, but if you can fix something enough to get it back into the field, that is a fundamental game changer. as far as the availability of these systems. And so, you know, for us, we obviously, like, you break a nose cone, you break a wingtip, like something happens. That's normal wear and tear. You put a new piece in, it doesn't really take us out of the mix. But I'll tell you, the fixing of other people's products, and it hasn't even been drones. Like, we fixed part of a howitzer, we fixed part of a Bradley fighting vehicle. There are these parts that are, you know, they break all the time, and they have really long lead times to manufacture them. Having that kind of mobile repair depot, I think, is a really, really powerful thing, both through the DoD, and now, because of this HP arrangement, we're getting a ton of inbound from oil and gas. So any place where you have, like, you know, you need, like, minutes either are important for saving lives or making money. This ability to kind of repair stuff in the field at speed is really, really powerful.
Oh, thank you. Another great question, actually, which I think, Frank, I'd like to hear from you, from your perspective on this. You know, there are a lot of different sort of printers out there, right? What is it that you're looking for, and what led you to the solutions you're using today? And I think this is the bit I like about this question is, and we've got machine builders here, we've got Emily here. What are the new additive capabilities you want in the near future? What's on your Christmas list?
Well, I think our technology differs to some extent from Dan's and the requirements we have. So we're operating in the commercial space, which is also regulated, and the material properties are very important. So we need to make sure that the structural properties are met, but also the economical ones, and be on this Pareto curve somehow. So, I mean, long story short, we're looking at weight efficiency. In other words, it should be lightweight, it should be durable, it should be rigid, and, you know, has certain material properties that, for example, absorb vibration or you know, don't break under certain circumstances. And while we're meeting all these material property requirements, then obviously you still want to have the design freedom of pretty much manufacturing any shape you want, and then do it quickly and do it at the minimum cost. So, and this is a pretty long wish list and with a lot of conflicting parameters, but overall we see that additive is moving down the road of improving each of those over time, and we now came to a point in time where it makes sense to manufacture drones using additive. And, you know, I think going forward, and Emily would probably agree on the HP side, each of those are improving almost on an annual basis. You know, we see improvements in terms of the material properties, the print speed, and then also the affordability and access to this technology. And maybe it's not exactly the answer you wanted, Michael, but, you know, this gives you the high level.
I think it's a good answer, and I think, you know, we've got Emily. Any hints about what's coming next? What sort of capabilities that people can expect, or is it's all held close to the chest?
No, I mean, I think we're very open in the development of what we're doing with our customers. We have a couple of exciting things on the horizon, or that have recently been released. So our newest platform, the 5600 printer, has the best machine reliability, repeatability between parts. We opened up for certain materials this process development software, which allows our customers to do print mode tuning or printing recipe tuning, so that they can adjust all the settings of the printer in order to optimize for their specific types of parts. And there's a lot of training on how that's done, right? HP has a lot of knowledge on how to do that tuning. So opening that up for our customers to optimize. We recently released a PA12FR or flame retardant material, which is useful in certain applications. And there's a couple other materials like our PA12 Smooth, which is not as widely used in the drone space yet. And then on the horizon, which will be later this year, we have our PA11 Gen 2, which is a second generation of that PA11, which is really highly ductile high impact on our newest platform. So taking advantage of all of the advantages of that platform as well, I think that's going to really be a game changer in the UAV space.
And Emily, are you seeing any particularly sort of customizable, sort of mission specific, even sort of ways of using additive here for UAVs? And that could be logistics, defense, surveillance, or other sort of applications. So is additive being used to customize, but not just customize actually at a higher volume?
Absolutely. I mean, this is what additive and specifically MJF was built for, is customization at a mass scale. So you can rapidly adapt to something without tooling delays. Like Dan has said and Frank have said, you can come up with an idea, CAD it up, and then have it ready to test the next day, have it ready to scale, and scale with the same process and same material that you did the development in. It's really quite adaptable, and the ability to print really robust and isotropic parts with additive also gives you, I think there's like a misconception or preconception about additive manufacturing or 3D printing, that it wasn't very strong in the past, or that you couldn't produce very many parts. And this is kind of a holdover from other types of additive manufacturing that those have evolved as well, but really when it comes to powder bed and MJF, it's extremely strong, extremely scalable, and very adaptable. So in response to that question where you're asking about mission specific, you can really design any part one-off to thousands of parts and have it be adapted to your mission, rather than having to adapt your mission to the type of parts that you already have developed.
I think talk about materials has piqued an interest, and then so this is another question for you, Emily. But I think afterwards, maybe Frank and Dan, if you can have a think about what materials you'd like to see made available. So the specific question is HP planning on developing sort of carbon fiber, polypropylene, or glass-filled materials, which Philip says is somewhat of a holy grail for drones?
Yeah, so I think okay, in terms of it being a holy grail for drones, it kind of depends on the properties that you want to be able to achieve the application that you're interested in. And so there may be something that is already available or in production that would work just as well. I don't think it comes down to exactly the material, but polypropylene does have a lot of advantages in terms of things like chemical resistance. We do have a polypropylene available on our printer. It is not glass filled or something like that. I would suggest that we talk to the materials team if there's specific, like the materials development team at HP, if there's specific properties that you're looking for that would benefit a certain application.
Right. And Frank and Dan, are there particular materials which you want to see brought online?
Dan, you go first.
Look, I do think there's space for some carbon fiber here, definitely. We're really interested in metals. That's probably the next thing we're exploring, and we're having those discussions with a variety of providers. And I think the whole idea here is you're never going to be able to do everything. So you either adjust what you build to the availability of what is there, right? Or you basically like say, this is the aperture we have to operate in, and you're like, that's it. And because you're really never going to have everything you want. That's kind of how I think about it. So yeah, carbon fiber is pretty interesting. But metal is, I think, the next big frontier for at least Firestorm.
Yeah, maybe also integration of different materials or embedment of components. So certain components would benefit a lot where you embed, say, electronics during the manufacturing process. And I mean, simple example of running cables through the structures, and you clip them on or you try and hide them somewhere. But if they can already be somehow integrated into the structure while it's being manufactured, then it's adding another level of usability and user friendliness to it, and even drive down assembly costs, for example, right? So I would agree to the carbon fiber and metal, and certainly metal has certain applications primarily on the propulsion side, and I think the fiber would allow things like wings and or landing gear, etc., to lightweight them a little more and make them more durable. So yeah, I would agree on that. But I think the integration of existing components or having different materials used at the same time, that could be another frontier.
Awesome. So I want to turn to you now, John. And some years ago, Ralph Resnick, the founding director of America Makes, wrote a really interesting article for us. This was probably about maybe 8 or 9 years ago now. So it's not a new topic, but it is a topic which I think is very relevant. And I think there's some interesting crossover here as well. So the article Ralph wrote was entitled Inviting the Trojan Horse in Through Your Shipping Bay Doors. And to summarize the article, Ralph discusses the cybersecurity risks of working with machine builders that may come from countries not necessarily entirely sort of friendly. And he paints this picture of the dangers. The reason I think it's relevant to this panel on drones is the ongoing sort of discussion and sort of potential sort of prohibition on DJI products in particular. I'm wondering whether you see, maybe talk about the state of that sort of cybersecurity landscape in 2015, but also how you see those this relating to sort of the additive world.
Yeah, sure. So I think, yeah, as far as the, looking at unfriendly actors, whether it could be state sponsored or not, basically leveraging our technologies to kind of gather a lot of intelligence or steal secret information, whether it's embedded in the electronics that, for equipment or products that were being sold, such as like the DJI drones, but also it's similar to the printers. One of the big issues, so there's a lot of printers that are out being used all over the place, that are from, suspicious countries, maybe, I guess you could say, that maybe would want our information. But you have the thing that's unique is you give the printer so much information. It has to have that to make the part. So that's one of its big advantages, but it's also kind of it's a big vulnerability. So it's one thing to give away a bunch of 2D drawings overseas to have a part manufactured, but they might not necessarily know a lot of other aspects of it down the line. But with the 3D file, they have a lot of information, and then they also have the file that they could just incorporate into their own designs. It's really hard to keep track of that, as far as where that information's going. And then also, one of the things within cybersecurity aspect of additive manufacturing is trying to harden the machines so they can't be infiltrated, not just for stealing information, but for going in and potentially causing disturbances in the manufacturing process, incorporating defects in certain areas where, I mean, you'd have to kind of know a decent amount, but it could be done, for inspection processes or testing processes that are set up to pick up defects and flaws and understand the product, but which you would get typically off the manufacturing process. So if you're incorporating defects that are atypical, say a flaw that's in a different orientation or some sort of offset on a layer that just is not typical, and it never happens unless somebody would do that on purpose, but it can be incorporated into an area of a lot of parts, where this can cause, some plant failures, basically sabotage. And there's a lot of ways people are looking into now is how do we pick that up? How do we track that? So I think a lot of it's going to be getting away from that globalization, at least with these heavy technologies and additive manufacturing, and really trying to source domestically and locking down kind of what information's flowing in, flowing out of this equipment, especially as technology advances, and we're just collecting more and more and more data to leverage to our advantage, but it also just increases vulnerabilities across the board.
I remember there was a proof of concept on introducing flaws into products which can be manufactured. I think it's called amusingly the droned sort of project from 10 years ago or so. Dan, I saw you sort of agreeing with a lot of what John was saying. What's your take on this area?
I mean, John highlighted a number of conversations we have constantly, right? So the need to air gap is actually quite real for some of these distributed manufacturing sites. My first company, we built counter UAS systems. We originally designed them for sports stadiums. Navy SEALs found them, took it to Iraq to fight ISIS. And a lot of the ideas for Firestorm for low cost, multi-mission manufactured drones came out of that fight, seeing how well ISIS was using homegrown and DJI drones, even before the war in Ukraine. But I'm telling you that story because we had to air gap a lot of our systems. So we'd basically hand them software updates and then they would go manually put them in. There's vulnerabilities for that too. We all know the Stuxnet story, but that is like one of the things we hear constantly, right? Is how do we not get Stuxneted? Okay. Because if you guys know the story or don't know the story, the Iranians thought everything was running well on their enrichment spinners, and it wasn't. They were basically going up and down and crashing all the time. So like those are real like concerns that we need to be having as an industry. And then the second thing that John said, which like boggles my mind, that the DoD has tons of bamboo printers. Okay, tons of them, and they don't even bother to flip them over and see where they're manufactured. Okay. So that also is a conversation we have to have constantly with end customers. And it goes back to like what Emily was saying 10 minutes ago. Like we are already constantly fighting what I call the desktop Yoda story with FDM, where everyone thinks FDM like was going to change the world. And we just made a lot of Yodas for people's desks. We're through that like trough of disillusionment, and we're now showing that like these printers can do unbelievable things. But when you match that with a number of the best printers being made in China, with the new bifurcation of the global order into like the China camp and the non-China camp, it's just going to take some time for us to work through these things. But we just have to be aware that there are real concerns and that cyber espionage is like a part of my language. It is a no shit problem globally. Okay. And so, I think there's more work to be done, but like a lot of times, like you're going to have to like figure out how to operate these things within the confines of like, in my world, a really important security environment.
Maybe just to put a sort of counterpoint to that, and I get what you're saying about the desktop world and its sort of obsession with trinkets, but if that does get people into deploying additive or 3D printing and maybe sort of developing their career, I think it's undoubtedly a great thing, right? And we've got a question which kind of maybe reflects that, which is talking here about what are the design challenges that a manufacturer might face if they shift from FDM to MJF. I mean, and the question says, well, how easily can you take an FDM design and sort of then print it on MJF? Maybe Emily, you might be well placed to talk about that one.
Sure. So I started writing out a response, but turns out we have a limited number of characters, and it kind of is larger than that. So I'll go through some of it, but also I suggest we set up a meeting and talk about it just in the interest of time. But really, you could take your CAD that you use for FDM, no supports in the MJF ecosystem, so you don't need supports. You don't really need to worry that much about how you orient it, but we can talk about that. And you could just print it. And it would come out fine, but we don't really have the concept of infill in MJF. we have, and it's much stronger in the Z direction, right? You don't have all that layering in, I mean, it's still built in layers, but we have fairly isotropic parts. So you could go a lot further to optimize for your end application by making the walls thinner, using some more complex geometries that you can't necessarily access with FDM, and internal structures. So there's a lot more that can go into optimizing for it, but you could just take the CAD and print it and have it come out well. But if you're printing at, say, 60% infill, and then you go and print it in MJF, it's going to be 100% dense. And so, yeah, those are kind of the differences there. We can go much further into it, but yeah, in the interest of time, I would say let's set up a meeting to talk about it. And if anybody else has input on that translation from FDM to MJF, interested to hear too.
Yeah, we do have a lot of questions. Thanks for respecting the time. So let's maybe a very quick question here. We've spoken, a lot about the advantages earlier, but are there any unexpected advantages? Anything that maybe isn't sort of obvious? We all know about sort of the standard sort of advantages, but any sort of thing which maybe people might not be aware of that anyone would like to sort of tell Connor here from Blueflite actually about.
I think for us, it's really been optimizing packing density. That's been one of the best things for us, right? Like if you want to hit big volumes, like you don't need to build like every part of the drone every day. Like, and we've done a lot of really good work with HP to kind of figure out some of this stuff, right? So maybe one day you're just printing like wings, right? Or another day you're printing a bunch of control surfaces, right? My point is like there are ways to use math to scale what you're doing, which is really, really impressive. And I am not an additive guy by nature. My co-founder and a bunch of our team came from Origin, which was acquired by Stratasys. So like, we have that experience, but that was one of the most eye-opening things for me when we started this business a couple years ago is you can hit huge volume with packing density. And that's really special.
Maybe Frank, I mean, you've probably already spoken with Connor a bit, but any pointers? Oh, we got you on mute.
You're muted.
Well, I think the unexpected developments are just continuously happening, right? Like to my points earlier, the technology is evolving over time. It's becoming more accessible. The printers become smaller. They print faster. The output is much more durable and usable in the aerospace sector. I mean, we're only going back a couple of years when experimenting with printing parts for drones, and they were just so much more heavy, and when you printed them too thin, then they started breaking. But we've overcome a lot of these hurdles and gotten to a point where we're basically printing drones that fly and can be certified and put into operations on a commercial basis or in a defense setting. And I think that itself is a tremendous achievement. And going forward, I think the sky's the limit. We can extrapolate and probably see also what we discussed here on the panel earlier, that at some point you press on the button and you almost get a 80% ready drone coming out of the printer, and it's almost airborne. Right?
There you go. The sky's the limit. I wonder how many times you guys get to say that in this industry. The sky's the limit. So look, we've got very short amount of time left. So in one sentence, just one sentence, I would like you each to tell me what's the most important move that the UAV and additive industries need to make to unlock the next phase of growth. Just one sentence. So let's stick with you, Frank, first. We'll go to Dan, to John, and then Emily can have the last word.
I would say in one sentence, bringing down cost further to enable even more scale.
Dan?
empower federated manufacturing.
John.
Understanding, I guess I'll say, the minimum qualification requirements.
Okay, good. Emily, to you.
Yeah, I would say on our side, working with our customers to use our insight into our technology in order to help further develop customer applications.
Superb. Well, thank you everybody for really helping get deep into how we can enhance performance with additive manufacturing for the drone market. Really great to chat. I wish we had more time to speak. So please give our panelists a nice virtual round of applause, and thank you again for all your insights today and being so open with us. The sky is not the limit for our next presentation because we're going to Mars. We've got sort of Ryan Watkins from NASA JPL joining, so please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Thank you.